Please turn in your copy of God's Word to Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1. Today we're going to look at verse 19. But because it's been a couple of weeks since we've been in Revelation, I'm going to read verses 9 through 19. So we're looking at verse 19, but I'm going to read for you verses 9 through 19. This is God's Word, beginning in Revelation chapter 1, verse 9. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, "Write down what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, and to Pergamum, and to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea." And then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, "Fear not. I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died. Behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades." And now we come to our verse for this morning, verse 19. "Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this." May the Lord bless the reading of his word. You might see that verse, "Write therefore the things that you've seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this," and think to yourself, how in the world is Jeff going to preach an entire sermon on that? This is where the fun begins when it comes to the book of Revelation. The meaning of this verse is hotly debated. In this short, innocent, benign verse has come theological controversy, the things of which, to quote Donald Trump, "the eye has not seen." I'm sure that when John penned these words, this sentence, that he had no intention of causing massive theological divisions in the church. But here we are. And those massive theological divisions exist. I want you to know before I say anything else on this verse and these divisions that I do not wish to add to those theological divisions. In fact, my desire is to play my part in unifying them. In the spirit of John chapter 17, where Jesus prayed the night before he was crucified that the church would be one, even as he and the Father are one. I'm tempted to quit Revelation because I'd rather quit Revelation than cause division in Jesus' church, in his family. So we proceed lightly, carefully, reverently. How you interpret verse 19 depends on your theological approach to the book of Revelation. The preterists interpret it one way. The futurists, another way. The historists, still another. Or I should say historicists. The idealist, another way altogether. And then there is this group of people called the eclectics. Now, if you don't know how the preterists interpret Revelation, or the futurist, or the historicist, or the idealist, or the eclectics, that's okay. You will. By the end of this morning, you will have a general idea of how these theological systems interpret the entire book of Revelation. Now, before we get into that debate, I should say that the first two words of verse 19, they're not disputed so much, but the rest of the words are. Look at those first two words. John is commanded by Jesus, write therefore. What you have here is Jesus commissioning John to write this book of Revelation to his people, to Jesus' people. And this revelation is based on the vision that John just saw that portrayed Jesus as being the all-sovereign King, Lord of Lords, God. He is in the midst of his people, the church, and he is serving them as priest, as king, and as judge. And he loves his people so much. Earlier in chapter 1, he tells us that he purchased these people forever with his own blood. So he's like, John, I want you to write a letter, a very important letter to my people. Therefore, because Jesus is so great, therefore, write. That's what John says, or that's what Jesus says here in the beginning of verse 19. Therefore, write. And so the question becomes, write what? And I want you to pay special note. Jesus tells him to write 3 different things. Number 1, the things that you have seen. Number 2, those that are. And number 3, and those that are to take place after this. The things that you've seen, the things that are, and those that are to take place after this. The question, the controversy revolves around, what do those 3 things, those 3 phases refer to? And the answer to that question depends on who you ask. If you're a preterist, you'll answer it one way, a futurist another, a historicist another, an idealist another way, an eclectic another way altogether. Now, before we jump into the waters of this debate, I want to give us a word of caution. It is vitally important as Christians to pursue the truth. Let me rephrase that. It is vitally important for you as a Christian to humbly pursue the truth. Key word there is humbly. You see, in the church, oftentimes when there's a theological debate, we can fall into the trap of never really listening to the other side, never really understanding the other side, what it is they believe and why they believe it. Instead, we have the tendency, we have the bent towards assuming our position is correct. Why? Well, because our favorite pastor taught us that way, right? We can assume that our position is correct, and we can allow pride to sneak in and blind us to what the other positions just might have to offer. We go into the debate just thinking, oh, well, my position is correct, and every position that is not mine is wrong. And we can become closed-minded, which works if you're right. But what if you're wrong? Or what if, to some degree, both positions are right and both positions are wrong? Let me illustrate, silly illustration. But I want to ask you, how do you pronounce the word controversy? Or should I say, controversy? Where do you land on the controversy surrounding the word controversy? Controversy is the American way of pronouncing that word. Controversy is the British way. And by the way, they said it first. So who's right? If you say, we are, you illustrate that sometimes we won't even listen to the debate. Who is right? Are they right and we're wrong? Or are we right and they've been wrong all along? Or perhaps we're both right and we need to live in love with one another. Now, I'm not saying that the debate on Revelation is as simple as solving the pronunciation of controversy, but I do want to ask you this question. Are you willing to learn from people who might say things differently than you? Are you open to learning from theological approaches to the book of Revelation that might be different than your own? Are you open to the idea that perhaps your current approach isn't 100% correct and that there's more to learn? Now, I'm suggesting that when we seek to understand other theological approaches to Revelation, it only serves to strengthen our own. It will either, one, show us where we're wrong, or two, confirm where we're right. For years, I staunchly believed in the futurist approach. That's what I was taught. That's what my first pastors and Bible professors taught me, and I love those men. They're dear to me. I trust those men. I can wholeheartedly affirm that I was raised in the tradition of futurism. But then I heard a man named R.C. Sproul talk about how he was constantly evaluating his position and understanding of Revelation And I thought to myself, why would you do that if you're right? Sproul was constantly seeking to understand the approach of other positions so he could learn how his own understanding of Revelation could be strengthened. At first, I thought to myself, why in the world would you do that, R.C.? And then it hit me. R.C. Sproul was more interested in humbly pursuing the truth than clinging to a position. He was in a humble pursuit of the truth that was open to growing, to learning more, open to being wrong, open to being corrected. I suggest that Sproul is a model for all of us. I have decided to pursue truth like Sproul pursued truth, trying to remain humble, teachable, willing to listen, willing to change. So, Christian, my word of caution is really an invitation. Will you humbly pursue God's truth? With that in mind, let's talk about the different theological approaches when it comes to the book of Revelation. Number one, the preterist approach. The preterist approach. If you're wondering how to spell that, P-R-E-T-E-R-I-S-T. Preterist. Oversimplified, preterist means past. Preterism believes that the events promised in the book of Revelation have already happened. They were fulfilled in the past, with the exceptions of chapters 21 and 22. Now, there are two primary forms of preterism. The first form sees Revelation as a prophecy of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 AD, and the events surrounding the fall of Jerusalem. The preterists understand Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great is referred to often throughout the book of Revelation. They see Babylon the Great as representing apostate Israel. Because after all, Jesus calls them twice in chapters 2 and 3, the synagogue of Satan. So they see Israel as Babylon the Great, and they help Rome oppress and persecute Christians. This, if the preterists are correct, would have made Revelation a huge encouragement to Christians undergoing these brutal persecutions at the hand of the Jews and also Rome. So that's the first form of preterism. The second form of preterism, it holds that the book of Revelation is a prophecy of the fall of the Roman Empire towards the end of the 5th century AD, ending in 476. This would make Rome, Babylon the Great, the persecutor of the Christians. And under this view, the purpose of Revelation is to encourage those early Christians of the first centuries to endure horrendous persecution and not to compromise, no matter what. Now, preterists, they take Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, and Revelation chapter 1, verse 3, at face value. Literally. They take it literally. God, in verse 1 of chapter 1, is clearly talking about the things that must soon take place. And he says in verse 3, the time is near. Can I just concede that that is a huge strength to the preterist argument? Now, in light of all this, when it comes to verse 19, and we are talking about verse 19 if you remember, there's three portions to this verse: the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this. The first one, the things that you've seen. Under preterism, this can refer to one of two things: either the vision that John just saw of Jesus. Write down what you just saw, John. Or it can refer to the entire book of Revelation. John, write down everything you see. So that's the first option. The first phrase. The second phrase that says those that are. According to the preterist view, that refers to chapters 2 and 3. And the then current conditions of those churches. And then when you get to that third phrase, and those that are to take place after this, that would refer to the then future events leading up to the fall and destruction of Jerusalem or the Roman Empire. So they were future to John, but they are past to us. Are you following me? Are you guys doing okay? Do you want me to just quit this right now? My boys aren't allowed to answer that. Look, there's all kinds of variations within the preterist camp. I just gave you a general overview. Secondly, let's give you a general overview of the futurist approach. The futurist. Oversimplified, futurists believe the exact opposite of preterists. The preterists believe most of the events in Revelation occurred in the past. The futurists believe most of the events in Revelation from chapter 4 on happen in the future. Pretty simple. Now, there are two predominant forms of futurism. The first is the most popular approach to Revelation in our society. We call that dispensational futurism. It interprets Revelation very literally. And it sees chapters 4 through 22 as all future events, still waiting to happen. Those future events include the church's rapture into heaven, the 7-year tribulation that happens after the rapture, the reign of Christ, the assembly of Eve. I said the reign of Christ. At the end of the tribulation, that's the reign of the Antichrist. At the end of that 7-year tribulation, the Antichrist assembles the evil nations to fight over Jerusalem. Then Christ returns at his second coming, and he defeats all of those evil nations and the Antichrist. That's what starts the 1,000-year literal millennial reign of Christ's kingdom. That's followed at the end of Satan's final rebellion at the end of the millennium, where he gathers all the unbelievers throughout the world and fights against Jesus and Jesus' people. He's ultimately defeated, and then Christ reigns eternally in what is called the eternal state. That is dispensational futurism. When it comes to verse 19, dispensational futurism interprets it like this. Are you ready? First clause, write what you've seen. That happened in the past. That's chapter 1 in the book of Revelation. Next clause, second clause, those that are. That speaks about the present church age. So that's chapters 2 and 3, and the letters written to the churches. The third clause, and those that are to take place after this, that's all future, and it starts in chapter 4, verse 1 to the end of the book. Okay? That's how they understand verse 19. To be fair, there is a second modified version of futurism. It does not take Revelation nearly as literally as the dispensationalists do. This version affirms that the church is a part of true Israel, and they often do not teach in a pre-tribulational rapture. Instead, they they stay on planet Earth until the end of this current age. Before I move on to the next approach, let me list a handful of strengths to the futurist approach. One, it emphasizes that Christians will continue to suffer for their faith, and that suffering will increase, especially before Jesus returns. Futurism also emphasizes the ultimate triumph of Jesus and his people at the culmination of history when Christ returns and inaugurates the eternal state. All of these things go hand in hand to promote a beautiful, big, high view of Jesus and his sovereignty, which we happen to like because Jesus is better than everything in every way. There are real strengths to the dispensational, futuristic view of Revelation. Now, there are certainly variations like preterism, but that's the general gist. Approach number three, the historicist view. The historicist view or approach. Follow me now. If the preterists believed most of Revelation was fulfilled in the past, and the futurists believe that most of Revelation will be fulfilled in the future, historicists believe that Revelation is being filled throughout history. Now, there are many, many different versions of the historicist approach. It's hard to summarize them and do them justice. But generally speaking, historicists see Revelation predicting the major events that have happened throughout history between the time of Christ's ascension and his return. For them, Revelation is a series of visions signifying the sequence of events that have and will occur during the church age. Let me give you some examples. Some historicists understand this letters to the 7 churches, the things we're about to jump into in chapters 2 and 3. They understand those letters as describing chronological ages that describe ages within the church leading up to the second coming of Christ. Many of these that hold to this position believe that we're living in that last age, the age of Laodicea, that church that was written the last letter to there in chapter 3. I should say that many historicists also view the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls that we'll read about later in Revelation as successive historical events in chronological order. Now, what kind of events are we talking about? Let me give you a small sampling. And not all the historicists believe this. Some of them believe starkly different, but this is, again, a general overview. What kind of events are we talking about? We're talking about the Goth invasions of Christianized Rome. That was the Great Persecution. The rise of Islam. Islam is seen as the beast rising out of the sea. The corruption of the medieval papacy. Many of the reformers believed that the Pope was the or a Antichrist. It also the historicists also include major events like the reign of Charlemagne, the Protestant Reformation, the mass killing of Jews by Hitler, and some would also include Israel becoming a nation in 1948. Now let me tell you some strengths of the historicist view or approach. It emphasizes God's imminent, intricate work in creation since Christ ascended into heaven. It also seeks to apply revelation to the entire church age equally and doesn't emphasize too much on the beginning of the church age or emphasize a whole lot on the future. They seek to bring balance. And this utilizes the great value of the book of Revelation for all believers living between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. How do they interpret Revelation 1:19? Too different for me to try to summarize succinctly. But I'll try. Write what you've seen. That could, under their view, mean all of the span of the book of Revelation. Everything John saw in his visions. The things that are. This is where it gets tricky. John writes and reports on the things that are happening, but are yet to happen. So that would be the third phrase. But once they happen, it gets transferred back to the first one. I know, it's mashed potatoes, but not clear, in other words. But that's okay. What I want you to walk away from here is saying, being able to respect the historicist and the way that they see Christ working in and amongst his church throughout all of the church age. Approach number 4. Now we're really going to get into some mashed potatoes. Are you ready for this? The idealist approach. The idealist approach to Revelation. Idealist, okay, if I've lost you, come back. Because I will totally lose you now. The idealist do not think of the book of Revelation in terms of time, past, present, future. Instead, they come to the book of Revelation as an allegory, describing the cosmic battle between good and evil, God and Satan. So it's not about time or prophecy. It's an allegory describing, giving us commentary on the battle between God and the devil, good and evil. Now, a strict idealist approaches Revelation as timeless, a timeless depiction that does not lead to a literal second coming of Christ. They do not believe in the consummation of history. It will just continue. I think it's fair to say that most of us would disagree with them here, if not all of us. I know I do. So it's not a prophecy talking about future events. It's an allegory talking about the battle between good and evil. Idealists interpret verse 19 not in terms like the other approaches where they're trying to say, well, Revelation 1 happened here and Revelation 2 and 3 here, and that's going to happen then. That's not how they interpret verse 19 at all. Instead, they think John, or Jesus, is talking about literary genre. In their view, John is commanded to write a book containing threefold literary genre. The things that you've seen, that first part of verse 19, it's apocalyptic literature. Everything John sees is apocalyptic. It's end of the world kind of stuff. That second phrase, those that are, that's talking about the figurative genre. John speaks about apocalyptic material in a figurative way. Third genre, this comes under the heading, and those that are to take place after this. That's eschatological. So you have apocalyptic, figurative, and eschatological. But eschatology means the study of last time, but they're not talking about the study of last time. They're talking about the future. The future, what will happen in the future. But it's not leading to one cosmic return of Jesus. Instead, they're saying what will happen in the future, and it will happen again and again and again. So how do they interpret verse 19? Well, Jesus is telling John to write an apocalyptic book, a figurative book, and a book about what will happen again and again in the future. How do they come up with this? The answer is they emphasize literary context. And you say, what's that? I've already bored you enough. They draw their argument from other similar type books in the Bible and say John is not thinking as a Jew in terms of time or chronology. Instead, he's thinking about things in terms of incomplete and complete. Apocalyptic literature, figurative language, and what will happen in the future. I'm not trying to make an argument for this, but what I am trying to say is they actually take things into account that maybe we should too. The strength of this position is that it seeks to emphasize the symbolic nature of John's writing. The huge glaring problem, and I'm trying to be as kind as I possibly can, but where they're wrong is that they don't see history leading to the second coming of Christ. And that's as negative as I want to get this morning. We saw from verse 1 in Daniel chapter 2 that God is absolutely using symbols to signify large portions of revelation. And so while they're wrong about some things, they're not wrong about others. Which brings us to our fifth and final understanding of how to approach the book of Revelation. It is called the eclectic approach. The eclectic approach. The eclectic approach, it interprets the book of Revelation in a way that aims to incorporate all of the strengths of the first four views or approaches. Thus, it's eclectic. I would humbly suggest that it would be foolish for us to think that the preterists don't get some things right. And I also think that it would be foolish to think that they got it all right. Just as it would be foolish to think that the futurist and the historicist and the idealist are either all right or all wrong. And so the eclectic approach seeks to take whatever strengths are offered by the other views and appropriate them in an effort to humbly pursue the truth. I am not a preterist. I am not a futurist. I am not a historicist. I am not an idealist. I try to take the best from all four. I am eclectic in my approach to revelation. There, now you know. People have been asking. Let me say this. I do believe that there are parts of the Olivet Discourse, that's Matthew chapter 24, that were fulfilled in 70 AD. I believe there are parts of Revelation that are fulfilled in the fall of the Roman Empire. Does that make me a partial preterist? Maybe. I believe much of Revelation has been fulfilled throughout the history of the church and is even being fulfilled today. Does that make me a partial historicist? Maybe. I believe in a future, the future, triumphal return of Jesus Christ, immediately preceded by a time of great tribulation. I also believe that Christians will meet Jesus in the air when he returns. Does that make me a futurist or a partial futurist? Maybe. And I believe that God signified his message and that much of Revelation symbolically represents how God has acted in the past, is acting now in the present, and will act in the future. Does that make me an idealist? I've been called worse. I think it's safe to say that I am eclectic in my view of Revelation, which means, church, I am not committed to a single system. That might scare you, but hopefully not too much. I am committed not to proving a certain system right or wrong, but to a humble pursuit of the truth. So what does verse 19 mean? I don't know. For sure. For sure. But I will tell you what I think it means. Are you ready? Look at verse 19. Write therefore the things that you have seen. I think what Jesus is telling John to do there is to write down the whole book. Why? Because that's what he tells him to do in verse 11. He told him, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches. I think that's what it means. The next phrase, those that are. Write down what you've seen, those that are. What do I think that refers to? Here's going to be my approach. I think that refers to chapters 1 through 20. Chapters 1 through 20 largely deal with the church age, the last days, the last hour. But I also believe that parts of chapters 1 through 20 also deal with future events surrounding the second coming of Christ. So yeah, I think it predominantly deals with the church age, but it also speaks to things that will happen leading up to the end. Now, when it comes to that last phrase, and those that are to take place after this, I think primarily that refers to what will happen in chapters 21 and 22. But like I've said, there are parts of chapters 1 through 20 that also deal with the events surrounding the second coming of Christ. Why do I think this is what verse 19 is referring to? I'm gladly going to answer that question the next 3 to 10 years. Literally. Let's pray.